Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part two of my upload for the wonderful Bishop Carlton Pearson, who received his transition, he would call it, on Sunday, November 19th. If you haven't seen part one of my video, please click the link in the description box to catch yourself up on that. I had spoken of him in regards to his life purpose work prior to the gospel of inclusion. And this part two is his life purpose work as of and after the gospel of inclusion. And again, for those who are unacquainted with that, I also have links in the description box. So peace be with us all. In 1994, Bishop Pearson had shared that his soul was troubled by seeing a TV program documentary of a Rwandan genocide. And it so bothered him that his beliefs began to shift as to how could a loving God allow or create an eternal hell for anyone. As times passed, he began to verbalize these thoughts and share conversations that he had, conversations with God, prayers with God, prayers to God, as to does hell even exist in such a way that it is forever tormenting of the body and the soul. He couldn't reconcile his new shift, as he called it, with what he had known his entire life. And that how could a loving God create an eternal lake of fire, hell, to burn in for certain souls that he created in the first place? Now, having said that, and as he began to say that out loud, he was deemed a heretic for it and was called a universalism. And doors began to close for him. Calls were not returned to him. Invitations were rescinded. He lost everything, in his own words, including his marriage, his home, his church, in which he built. The first video, I talk about his climb in which he built these things, the Azusa Conference, the connection with Oral Roberts University. Once he began to speak about how his soul was inflamed by the thought of a forever hell for anyone, some few pastor close friends of his began to counsel him or talk with him and try and redirect him back to discussions that were not like that, I'd say. He even had a surprise meeting with his good friend at the time, rest in peace, Dr. Miles Monroe, who escorted Carlton to the office of Oral Roberts, who had a talk with Carlton to persuade or convince, or perhaps even a light reprimand, to get back in line with his religious virtue, I'll say. Now, these are my words. But Carlton could not let go of this new shift that he calls it, this new truth, this new expansion in consciousness, this new understanding. He couldn't understand why a God in whom his life was purposed would have a forever hell for anyone that he created. Now, whether you agree with that or not, or you line up with that or not, and I'm not saying that I do or not, I'm speaking of his journey, how his purpose shifted. And again, however and whatever we think, we can't deny the fact that he was shunned in the spiritual world, in the religious world. He was reprimanded. He was snatched back his calling. Well, how do you take back a calling that you never gave? God gives the calling. He was mocked. He was made a disgrace. This, a man who opened the doors and set a platform for many names that I don't even call, but many names that we know. Just watch Azusa, you'll see them all there. And none of them would return his call. Open the door. Invite him in. Have a talk. Now, maybe they did, and we just don't know. But it never showed up for the rest of us. What the rest of us saw is defeatism continuing on this man's life. This man who gave his life on purpose, for his purpose. And I think he was elevated to fall to some degree or the other. He was a progressive thought leader, a spiritual teacher, on the Board of Regents, council presidents, and many Azusa conferences and many of his sermons, he would say, the Spirit of the Lord is telling me this. I hear it, God is speaking to me. All of that. So when God spoke to him this time, he didn't hear him this time. If he is a trained listener to the voice of God, he sat down with, I think, Donald Walsh. I think that's the author's name. I don't have it in front of me, who wrote the book Conversations with God, in which he speaks about having conversations with God. Many pastors speaks about having conversations with God. So now all of a sudden, because you don't like the conversation or how it's moving, you want to call the person a heretic? Now, please, I want to offer an expansion and a conversation and not a judgment, because that's what tends to happen on sensitive topics like religion and politics. If you're not exactly in line with someone else, then you're attacked. And I'm just saying, may this man rest in peace on the laurels by which he have served his purpose fully, despite what we think of it. His soul was troubled by such genocide and then continued torture for an eternal hell. He just couldn't reconcile that. And I'm finding that hard and difficult to see that too. If we have a loving God, I'm saying. So, people get so up in arms, but I often ask myself too, when I hear people get up in arms, what happened to the band of forgiveness that we talk about so much? The grace, the tolerance, the patience, the care, the compassion, the empathy. When the soul is crying out, he told you his soul was troubled. Why didn't anyone nurse the troubled soul, is what I'm saying. After all, he loved the troubled spirit of thousands. That's all I'm saying. He gave his life. Who are we to say that the shift he experienced is no different than the Azusa shift he offered, the counsel he gave to presidents and international leaders, the Oral Roberts University Band of Regents that he sat on the board with. Who's to say that this new shift wasn't exactly right, just like that was? Who's to say? Who's to say? That's all I'm saying. Because you don't know and I don't know. And unless you know someone that came from hell to tell you what it's really like, or someone who dropped down from heaven to tell you what it's really like, you and I don't know. We can only hope. We can only believe what we've been told. And because someone else was telling us something else that was different from their magnitude of spiritual understanding, doesn't make them wrong. May not make them right, but doesn't make them wrong. I think for me, I often wonder why he was so castrated. I often wondered that. Why wasn't he lovingly embraced instead of severely disgraced? Where were those Christian arms to hold him in the way that he held thousands in a conference just by standing before them? Why are we so spiritually sour when things are not as we knew them before? When we know we don't know everything. This is what he was saying in higher dimensions, in higher consciousness, in levels of awareness. And what do? Call physics, call physics, call heretics, because it's not in the biblical format that we have always known. It's just judgmental to me. It's just judgmental. How do we expand? How do we love fully without restrictions when we cannot accept a different understanding? That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. And as he now is resting in peace, he was gentle giant enough to leave us a final message, which I dropped in the description box. Click it. A 3-minute message where he is still saying, God loves you. Pray and be clear about that. So I will end on that note that God loves you. Pray and be clear on that. And that's all that matters. Okay? Namaste. Have a good evening. And I love you. I love you. And God loves you too. Good night.